Cool. Hi, I'm Dan. This is Joe. We are 2/3 the part of the Sous Chefs community board. The other member is in a talk somewhere around the corner, giving a talk on testing, which we'll kind of cover a little bit. So, strangers using your code is awesome. You've created a bit of code. You're like, yeah, I want to share this with the world. Everyone else can make use of this. Did this previously with something like the Autofest cookbook. I was like, right, I spent weeks doing this. Someone else can probably use this. Using other people's broken code is terrible. I was like, well, it helped them, but it's not helping me. How do I fix that? Being a maintainer, yeah, it's pretty good. You get to share your code, you get to close bug reports, you feel like a bit of progress is happening in your life. It's great. Strangers, again, using code is awesome. Being a solo maintainer can be great, but often life gets in the way. And that's when solo maintaining a cookbook or any open source project becomes a drag for the people using it and the people maintaining it. And that's kind of what we're going to try and solve today. And the three sort of stories I'm going to tell you today are where we came from, what we're doing, and where we want to go next with hopefully everyone in this room.
So to put that a different way, first we're going to talk about the first cookbook that was part of Sous Chefs. Before it was even Sous Chefs, we had the Mongodb Cookbook, and there were a few disasters involved, and we hope you'll laugh at a few of them since we're past them. The next thing we're going to talk about is one of the greatest success stories we've had recently, the HA Proxy Cookbook, and how that's been such a success. And finally, we're going to talk about Si se puede. So you may not know this, but down the street, we have a street named after Cesar Chavez, and he wanted you to know that you can, we can, yes, we can. And that's really what Sous Chefs is all about. And I want to talk about how you can and how we can build this community together. So, going back to the beginning, a little bit about MongoDB and its disaster theater. You see, once upon a time, I was a simple, naive developer, just like I am now. But hopefully, I've gotten a little bit wiser. But all this time, I've cared about business value, about making things work, about getting things into production so that way they don't break, and ultimately being able to sleep nights and weekends. And I think we all want that. So when I was in a business that was built upon MongoDB, and our core service was a manually configured box, it was a little painful. We wanted to upgrade. We wanted to have more reliable hardware. We wanted to have a defined process for rolling to new versions. We wanted to make sure that our backups and recoveries were well documented. And we didn't want to do it entirely or by ourselves. We're using open source software. We want to build upon the community and give back to the community if we're developing processes around this. We want that to be part of a whole. So, in the beginning, I discovered that there was a pretty neat MongoDB cookbook. It would install MongoDB. It could support it in a clustered configuration. It allowed you to do sharding and replica sets, and lots of fancy features that if you haven't worked with MongoDB, you don't care about. But it made my life a lot easier. So I could get up and running and start using this with my development environment, and everything was great. But as I started investigating things, I noticed that something smelled a bit off. You see, what had happened is there was maintainers who'd originally created this cookbook. They put together the code, they accepted pull requests, they responded to GitHub issues, But as often happens in our lives, things move on. And so did they. And unfortunately, they didn't have the time to maintain and care for this piece of software that they'd originally written. So what happened? A diaspora of forks. You see, it's GitHub, and forking is practically free. And if you use this thing in your enterprise, it costs you nothing to start your own fork, make it work for you, and move on. Or at least it seems to cost you nothing. So you end up with these communities, these little businesses and teams and individuals who are solving their individual problems. They could be working together, but they're taking care of themselves, and very often, that's okay. But as you start getting forks, you start noticing that you're not keeping up with the future. You're not keeping up with the present. So what happens? Things start creeping in. As, say, a MongoDB release gets put out, you may discover that your cookbook now suddenly has a bug when it tries to support that. If you go further, you may discover that your PRs no longer merge together, that you get merge conflicts, and so you can't even take other people's code and use it with yours, because nobody's taking care of bringing these people together. And finally, you start noticing that you're not officially releasing anything because no one's got that authority, and so you give the impression that your software is actually dead, that it's no longer moving in any direction whatsoever. And sometimes this is fine. Sometimes you can make it work inside your organization, and that's okay. But as things begin to progress, you start noticing that maybe it would be easier to just try and fix it. So what I did is I talked to the people who had these forks, who had these merge conflict PRs, and I started trying to bring them back together. I tried to make sure that we rebased all of their commits. I tried to make sure that we went through all of their issues, and we prioritized them. We recognized which ones were legitimate, which ones couldn't be tested, which ones needed a little bit of a dance back and forth to see if they applied to the modern version. And this reunification was wonderful. But unfortunately, it wasn't perfect because we didn't have the authority to make those releases. We managed to get commit access, and that was important. It meant that we could keep the code alive, but we couldn't officially release anything. And they say in computer science you have two hard problems: cache invalidation, naming things, and off by one errors. And if you can't convince people that your software works by releasing it and having the name attached to the most recent version of the code, you've both got a naming problem and a cache invalidation problem. I hope you don't have any off by one errors, because this story gets awfully complicated then. But essentially what we had to do is we had a long-lived branch. And fortunately, Berkshelf had started making some progress by then, so you could live with a GitHub-sourced software. That was fine. At least as good as this picture says. So we moved on. We kept it alive. It worked more or less. And we had a long-lived branch. And people made do. But as often happens in life, things move on. And so did I. And so did some of the other maintainers. And so we had another diaspora, because nobody with a commit bit and nobody with the ability to release this code was still around. You see, when this stops actively being a single community, you start getting another divergence of forks. You get tickets saying, "Are you still alive? Is anyone maintaining this cookbook?" And that's not any particular fun. But here's the thing. The code worked. It was fine. It was technically fine if you used where it was developed. But in practice, bit rot is a thing. While while the code really did work on the version of MongoDB it was developed against, and the version of the OS that it was developed against, and the version of Chef that it was developed against, as time marched on, we lost that. You couldn't choose to use, say, the newest version of Chef or systemd or the version of Mongo that actually had a reasonable config file because it wasn't supported. If you used the old version, that would be fine. But you couldn't keep moving forward with the tide of progress and still use this old code base. That's really what bit rot is. And though I had moved on, I still paid attention to the community. And I cared about them because they had real problems. So I tried to come back and fix it. So I created an organization called Chef Brigade. This is the last time you'll hear that name. We all took a vote and we changed the name to Sous Chefs. That's S-O-U-S. If you're in this talk, you actually know it because you attended. But the point of the group was to have an organization where we could make sure that the torch got passed. And as we identified these problems, we made sure that new people came in and became maintainers. And they got the authority to make the good work that they were already doing part of the community. But as often happens, sometimes momentum just doesn't keep pushing things on. You see, the Chef Brigade organization, it had the MongoDB cookbook, but it also had lots of other cookbooks that no one used, like the Nano cookbook, which is spectacular. It has essentially one line in it. Everything else is just boilerplate. And I put all that stuff in there to give the impression that there was a real community until I could get one. But fortunately for me, Tim Smith it was the London Community Summit, right? Well, it was the Community Summit last fall, where he started reminding people that if you're encountering a cookbook that's broken, that's unmaintained, and you've got the time and energy to fix it, there's a group that's happy to help you keep that thing alive. And so, thanks almost exclusively to Tim Smith, lots of people started flocking back to Sous Chefs. We changed the name, and we started bringing back in a whole bunch of cookbooks. Now, there's something distinctive about Sous Chefs. Now, if you take part in Apache or Debian, you'll notice there's a lot of process. There's a lot of things that you need to do in order to just be a mere member. Whereas with Sous Chefs, what we've gone with is just enough community. All you need to do is raise your hand and si se puede. That's all. That's all you need to do. Just be a member and you are one. And we also wanted to learn from another organization called Take This that focuses on mental health, and their catchphrase is, "It's dangerous to go alone." And that's true in so many places in life, especially when it comes to trying to maintain a piece of community infrastructure. It's hard. It's painful. And we don't want to do that. So we want to learn from that, and we want to learn from each other. And that's what Sous Chefs enables us to do. And having taken this basic organizational structure, we've managed to have some very great successes. In particular, the MongoDB Cookbook, which had been dead before I even found it, has finally had its first release in over 2 years, and that was a couple months ago.
Yeah.
And just last night, we released 1.0 of the MongoDB Cookbook. And this is all entirely thanks to Grant Ritter, who has herded cats and shaved yaks and brought this thing back into modernity. There's still a lot of work to be done, but he has worked with lots of different people to get lots of things modernized. And I'm enormously grateful for all the work that he's done. But the thing is, MongoDB is not the only cookbook in Sous Chefs that's been a success. In particular, the HA Proxy cookbook has taken a lot of these things and taken them even further. And I think it's been an even greater success. And Dan is going to talk you through what's happened in that community.
Yeah, so the HA Proxy Cookbook wasn't the first cookbook I laid my dirty hands on when I got into Sous Chefs. There was a Samba cookbook, and I'd used that a few times, and it wasn't quite working the way I wanted to. So I was like, well, there's this Sous Chefs organisation. I could try and contribute to it, and actually there's this custom resources thing. Well, this is my chance to make something a bit better in the world. And we'd finished rewriting that, we released that, and we learnt a lot of things from that. So then we took a cookbook that was much more complicated, had a lot more moving parts in it. And like, right, okay, well, we've got a sort of almost boilerplate now. How do we apply it to something like the HA Proxy Cookbook? Well, to start off, we had a whole lot of open PRs, a whole bunch of bugs. Well, some of them weren't really bugs. They were, I don't really know how to configure this cookbook correctly. If I put this config file like this, and then I set this in this really weird order, it doesn't work, everything blows up. It's like, well, okay, what's maybe documentation problems going on there? Maybe not real bugs. And then we were moving to Chef 13, just before we were doing HA Proxy rewrite, and we were thinking, well, there's a lot of Chef 13 deprecation errors coming up. Well, we should totally try and fix those. And one thing that was apparent throughout this entire process is that HA Proxy Cookbook wasn't really easy to use, and it was really hard to get a new piece of code in there. As was apparent to all the open PRs, I think there was something like 20 open PRs when we first found it, and most of those sadly were closed down because they just could not be merged in. Pretty similar to the Mongodb Cookbook. It's like, okay, well, this needs to be merged in, then rebased, and then this needs to be rebased, and then, oh, okay, right. And then I flipped table, and I was like, right, starting from scratch. I'm sorry, I'm going to take your code, and we're going to make the world better from there. Well, how do you make the world better? Well, we need to have a good starting point. So you update the tooling, so there's a bit of better chef spec in there, and we went really heavy on the inspec this time. So switching from service spec to inspec made our tests run faster, and they were a lot easier to maintain going forward. And, well, okay, well, we were going to get to a point where we were going to have this rewrite finished. Well, how do we then go off and contribute to that cookbook going forward? And there should be a, hey, I'm a new contributor. Where do I submit my PR? And then what things do I have to do to make that PR mergeable? So I said, like, we had a very minimal chef spec, integration testing, and the really important one on this slide is the CI setup. So with the Mongodb Cookbook, we had, was it Ubuntu 11.04, I think it was? That was the only supported platform that we'd ever tested on, I think. With the help of Kitchen Docken, which Sean O'Mara wrote a few years ago, we're like, right, great, we can write a cookbook and test it across all of these platforms that Docker supported and run that straight into Travis, and we would get a green or a red X back. Okay, right, well, that's something we've got to do, otherwise, how do we know if this new PR is even going to work in it? That should just be automatic. Okay, so that was all fixed, and then you think, okay, the rewrite's going to happen, and then maybe no one will use it, and then no one will get interested in it. I'm not sure if you can see there, right at the end of that graph, that was the rewrite. I think there was 50 or so commits, and there were really big PRs. I think, great, okay, well, all the work's done, except it wasn't. PRs came pouring in, well, great, you fixed my problems, but now this bit of config doesn't work. And the PRs were small, tested, and quick, and we released within a week. In fact, some of them we released within an hour of submitting the PR. They were closed down, released, done, and we unblocked somebody. And that was great, because we knew it wasn't going to break anything, because there were tests there. And there were new tests for new functionality, because we had a contribution guide. And that's kind of where we want to get to, is everything should be easy and pretty boring to get and fix that. And Joe will speak a bit more about making things a bit more boring.
Okay, so you'll notice we've talked about 2 cookbooks, but those aren't the only cookbooks that are part of Sous Chefs. We have a number of different source code repositories. Some of them are cookbooks, some of them are other things. And And we want to have a way that we know this community continues to grow and can continue to take care of itself, even if I stop being here, even if Dan stops being here. So how do we do that? Well, I'm going to talk you through a few different stories. I hope you can put yourself in these shoes, and you'll see yourself in these problems. And you can let me know whether or not you think this future is at all possible. So I mentioned that I used to be an infrastructure engineer at one company where I was working with MongoDB. And I'm still an infrastructure engineer. But if you're anything like me, you today, right now, have a problem. And it's not an exciting problem, it's not a sexy problem, it's not a problem that is core to your business value, it's a boring problem. It's something that no one's going to appreciate when you solve it. It's like taking out the trash or plunging the toilets. It just needs to be done. You don't need something exciting. You need something boring. So the first thing that Sous Chefs wants to make sure that you have is a boring solution. We want to make sure you look up a technology plus the word chef. You end up on a README, and you have the equivalent of a Stack Overflow answer. Not the first one, the third one that actually works. And you can copy and paste that into your system, and you can just be off and running. And you'll be happy, because it was a boring problem, and now it's got a boring solution. All you had to do was apply the community's most common set of defaults. But this is reality. This is real life. And unfortunately, it doesn't always work like that. So hypothetically, you might need a metric system. You need to know what the numbers are inside your business. Maybe you've got an executive who cares a lot about KPIs, or maybe you need to know all the intricate timings of a very high-performance service. But you need numbers to go into a place and not fall away. That's all. You need numbers to go there and be, so you can look at them later. Okay, so graphite is a delightfully boring solution. If you want to go with something cool, there's lots of options out there. But let's just talk about graphite, because it's a boring problem. Well, the first thing you do after you set up your default graphite install and you start sending metrics to it, and you get a pretty graph, and hey, your devs actually realize that you build things that could potentially look nice, so long as you're not using the default graphite dashboard, because that thing is ugly as sin. So long as you stick something interesting on top of it, you can make a real success. But immediately after you've done that, suddenly you need StatsD. And what does that mean? That means you need to go in and configure your storage settings, because the defaults don't work. And everyone who needs to do that needs to go in and makes a tiny little customization to the configuration. And so in those cases, we try and use a custom resource. No, we don't always. MongoDB, for example, still has a lot of things that are very old and very difficult to work with. But as we're moving forward, we want to have a custom resource so you can extend it, so you can easily make changes to it, and so it exposes those common things that you're going to need to configure. But as always, this is real life, and while your custom configuration has probably gotten you through another month or 3, you're going to discover that you need a feature that isn't in the cookbook. Maybe there's something cutting edge, like a data store that happens to be in graphite and was released many years ago but still hasn't come out of beta. Hypothetically, you want to support that, and that's important to you, but it's not become important to the community yet. Well, there's nothing wrong with you taking our cookbooks, bringing them in-house, forking them, maintaining your own thing. That's fine. But in the event that you want to push that back, we want to have an open contribution process, so that way it's as easy, if not easier, to do it in public than it is to do it in private. And it's not immediately apparent how you make that better. So one of the things that we've done, I have not come up with these things, and wow, we succeeded with this slide in making our eyes bleed. Wonderful. The thing is, getting these problems to be automated is rather difficult. And And places that have a well-developed chef culture, lots of process, lots of experience, they already know how to do all of these things. They probably have a wiki page that tells you, this is how you begin writing a new cookbook. This is how you go in and modify an existing cookbook. This is how you test. This is when you use unit tests. This is when you do continuous integration. This is when one tool or another tool gets used. And this is how one of your peers is going to look at your code and review it to let you know if it's up to snuff, if it's going to do what you think it should, if it's going to lead to problems later on. And finally, how to release it, how to make it official, how to make it permanent and reusable by the people that care about this problem you're trying to solve. Well, what we've done is we've made all of this public. And as much as possible, we've made it fully automated. So when it comes to writing a new cookbook, you can use a generator. We have extended the generators that come from Chef, and they can solve a lot of your problems with a simple command, and they will provide a boilerplate that you can then go fill in. Similarly, when it comes to testing, we have documentation explaining recommendations. But not just that, we've made sure that they're fully automated in running them as well. So when you submit a PR, it runs on bunches of platforms. Now, I don't know how many of you maintain cookbooks inside your organization. If you have to maintain them for more than one platform, tell me how much fun that is. Now, if you have to do ones that, say, support Windows and Macintosh and various different Unix flavors, tell me how fun that is. Well, we're trying to do that for you. We're not 100% there. You know, Plan 9 is not in our testing stack, and we haven't quite figured out how we're going to make that work. But we're working on getting all of the core systems supported, and we're growing that as best we can. Similarly, when it comes to review, we're using the GitHub flow, but we're also making sure that we have well-documented standards so various different people in Sous Chefs can come in and help you. Just because you're contributing to one cookbook that, say, you know very well, doesn't mean that we don't have an entire community of people who know how to read Chef. Maybe they don't know your exact problem, but they can come in and they can check it for you. And by having this large pool of people, we can have a little bit of high availability on our review process. And that makes things happen a little bit faster. Our queue times are a little bit better. And finally, when it comes to releases, you may have noticed that we've had a number of problems with releases over the years. You get these people who squat on a namespace, and I say that as if it were a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just that it's important that this is being used to advance the community. And in order to do that, you need to make sure that these things work. And so we want to make sure that when we find a solution that works, when we find code that works, we release it. And we make it part of the community as soon as possible. So Tim, in particular, is very diligent. As soon as he merges a pull request, he'll release that cookbook to the supermarket almost instantly. Because if you've got a problem and you've got a fix, you need that fix in your system as soon as possible. And this is great. This is wonderful, and I hope you all have this level of automation inside your organizations as well as in the community. But sometimes you're going to discover that things aren't happening quite the way that you want. So you may find it necessary to join the maintenance team. You may become very invested in a particular tool. Your business starts to depend on it. And so you want to be able to lead the discussion, lead the conversation, and lead the solutions that are getting applied to the problems in your world. And so we've also developed a process for this. Now, very similar to these other things, it's just a change request. It's just a PR. If you want to join a maintenance team, all you have to do is go onto Sous Chefs and make a PR, adding yourself as a maintainer to a repo, and suddenly you are one. Now, of course, there's a review process. We want to make sure that you have the support that you need in order to be an effective maintainer. But one of the things that we're trying to work on in the next year is a mentorship system. So that way, maintenance is not just by people who've been working with Chef since every version number started with a 0 dot. There's lots of people who are solving real problems and who are very smart, but they don't have the experience maintaining chef things that some of the rest of us do. And it's important for us to share that knowledge to keep this community alive. Otherwise, we're going to end up exactly in the same situation as MongoDB. So we want to make sure that joining the maintenance team is very straightforward. And we want you to succeed as a maintainer. But just because you started maintaining a piece of software doesn't mean that you're going to be using that software forever. You may have started with graphite and said, this solves our problems beautifully. And a few years later, you discover, oh no, I actually need faceting on these metrics in a way that causes me to have like 10x the amount of storage. This is entirely inadequate to my needs. I need something totally different. And so we've also developed a process for starting something new. Because as things grow, things also die. And it's important that we have a way to make sure that things that happen in the future are as well maintained as things that have existed for a decade. So we've got all of these processes, not just for starting something new, but occasionally for allowing something to leave Sous Chefs as well. Because I'm up here with all these grand dreams, and I'm speaking these wonderful words, and it sounds great, right? But I'm actually a terrible person. You don't know this. I'm a terrible person, and you're going to want to leave my organization at some point, but once I make that clear to you. But I'm hiding it. And we're going to want to move on. We're going to want to get away from me. I hope this isn't true, but have you ever been part of an organization where you believed in their vision and then you discovered that you really did not? We want to have that openness at the core of this organization. And that's what we're doing. So there's a reason. There's a reason we're doing all of these things as automated and as collaborative and as open as possible. And it's because software is not actually about bits. Arguably, it's about language. But language is about people. It's about communication. We're talking to these machines, and at the end of the day, if the machines understand us, it's a correct solution. But if the human beings who have to read our software later don't understand us, then we've reached a dead end. And we're not going to be able to advance our community and solve our problems efficiently. We're wasting time. We're building things and letting them crumble into ashes right before our eyes. And cookbooks have been doing this right in front of us. And we need to avoid that. We need to make sure that we treat the people involved with this software with the respect that they need and give them the authority to make this community a better place. And that's what Sous Chefs is really all about. And so we have a vision of where this will go. And Dan is going to talk about, well, Charlie Sheen at least.
So we've done all this. So what does a winning solution look like? And I might suggest it's probably not Charlie Sheen. Improvements are easy. Okay, so I want to improve something. Well, what do? Well, Cookbook should be easy. It should be tested. As you said earlier on, the HA proxy. Inspect should be there. Test Kitchen should be there. So it should be easy to just roll up Test Kitchen and be great. I've got all the platforms I need to have confidence in the change. Chef delivery is in that cookbook as well. So we've got a really nice chef delivery local mode that we're using across all of our new cookbooks that we've been rewriting recently. There's a .delivery folder with basically a link to a centralized gist on the internet, which we keep maintained in the chef communities, which runs our unit phase, our lint phase, and all the generic phases that actually we had in our rake file, but the rake file was 100 lines long. This is now 6 lines long, centrally maintained. Dear God, it's a lot easier. And of course, stick Travis on the back of that, you've got confidence. Just change the slides quickly, it's fine. We should be using common patterns everywhere. So yeah, the HA proxy cookbook, if you look at the back of it, the accumulator pattern looks super, super similar to the Samba cookbook because yes, I wrote it, but the pattern is the same, the style is the same because actually we're solving a very, very similar problem. There are install resources, there are config resources. Well, if I'm going from one cookbook to another cookbook, I know how to contribute because, hey, this looks pretty similar, and I can help out the Samba cookbook maintainer now because I understand how that hash works in a particular really weird way. Well, we're going to have the same problem again for the next 4 cookbooks probably. Accumulative patterns are a very common use case. You know, we can switch that now. One thing that we're really good with Sous Chefs is because we're a community of practitioners and we have the same problem again and again and again and again and again for like the 20 cookbooks we are maintaining or something crazy like that. No. We see common patterns of pain around the edge of chef. One of those was chef spec. We were feeding back to Tim Smith, who actually works in the board but has no paid membership into doing Sous Chef's work. He's like, great, guys, what would make your job easier? What would make your life easier to make custom resources work for you? Well, chef spec matches just don't really work, and well, it would be nice if they could just automatically work. They work now. As of 2 weeks ago, we were like, right, we can just remove all these matches files that don't do anything in cookbooks. Great, and that was thanks to a nice community of people. And as we mentioned earlier on, we ship often, we ship fast, we don't block. And yeah, that is now happening with the HA Proxy Cookbook. I think we've released 5 times in the last 2 months, which is nice. And since yesterday, we've got a bunch of new friends. The OSX Cookbook has joined us within the last 2 days. We've been talking on Slack and saying, hey, we've got these cookbooks that we want to maintain. We've got a new problem. Actually, there are a few of us already wanting to fix the OSX Cookbook. We've transferred that straight in. And the Line Cookbook, that hasn't had a release in, 2 years, I think. That was rewritten within the last 3 weeks, I think, as well. Transferred across from the great Sean O'Mara. Yeah, that's now being transferred across to custom resources. It's got a bunch of testing. We put in Travis testing, and we're about to go and release a new version of that within the next probably day or so. Probably at the hack day.
And you made a really good point earlier about the Line Cookbook. It's not that it was broken. It was that as we moved to more modern implementations of Chef, we could more easily test things. We could simplify the code. And so now it's much more easy to go in and verify that the code is correct. And we're able to get that community review and modernization that lets a functional but somewhat impossible to maintain cookbook come back up to the future. And I think that's really what we're all about, is about getting more people involved. At the moment, there's 2 very simple ways that you can get involved. The first is come join us on the Chef Community Wiki, or Slack, and join the Sous Chefs channel. That's SOUS-chefs, French, hooray. Second, spelled exactly the same way, is souschefs.org, and that has links to all of our processes, how to get involved, how to modify a cookbook, and those sorts of things.
Yeah, and we mentioned earlier on about the large number of cookbooks. So if you wanted to be involved in Sous Chefs, you might already be involved if you're using this entire list or any of this list of cookbooks. We have got a whole hunk of stuff we're currently maintaining. And we hope to increase that with maintainers because I think pretty much half of those are maintained by Tim by himself. Yeah. And we'd love to HA those cookbooks. Thank you very much.
So I'm wondering, just hit me. Just to repeat what she said, actually there's a microphone behind you. So what she just said was, thank you for fixing the HA Proxy Cookbook. And as I had nothing to do with that, I gave him a hug.
I had some time off.
So I'm not a developer. I got into ops by way of, I went to film school and wanted to work on movies, and they were like, go build our servers. And I was miserable the first 5 years of my life, and it paid off finally. Okay, so I am still very beginner at coding. I can cobble things together and try to make them work, right? So I'm not a developer, but I want to get better at it. I use Chef every day. So I figured, would it be a good way, and thanks to Jamie who invited me to Sous Chefs. Is it Sous Chef or Sous Chefs?
Plural.
Sous Chefs.
And with a dash.
As complicated as we can make it.
Okay, so for somebody who's not a developer and doesn't even understand basic coding terminology, but just knows to look at the stuff and try to modify it and cobble things together, what's a good way to get into this? Because I don't want to do bad practices, bad ways of doing this, right? Like, being part of code reviews? Like, one way I try to learn how things work is I go on code reviews, and then I'm like, oh, this is how they do it, right? Like, so what do you recommend? How do I start being a contributor?
Don't stop talking.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Seriously.
You mean like ask questions?
No. I mean, come find people and talk with them. Identify the problems that you have and work through the solutions with them. If you can get code review on the solutions that you make on your own, that's great. If you can go look at their solutions to problems and try and work out why those things work on independently, that's also great. Okay. But most importantly, keep coming back. You need to continually have a conversation with people because it's about language. Code is just language. And to be an excellent developer, you need to be an excellent communicator. Not with a computer. The computer will probably figure out what you're doing, do it wrong anyway, and you'll have to move on. But interacting with other human beings, some of whom are excellent developers and some of whom are not, is what becoming a good developer is all about. It's about communication. So keep talking, keep coming back, and read and write as much as you can. So that's the correct answer and not useful at all, right? It's like, okay, I'm going to go talk on the internet and look like an idiot. Thanks, Joe. I appreciate you telling me that. So practically, find a problem that you have that we can help you with. Come tell us about it.
I already have that problem.
Excellent. So come in, create a GitHub issue, a pull request, or come in Slack and yell at us.
See,
Any of those things
that you mentioned, I don't know even how to do.
Okay.
Yeah. Come to Hack Day.
The thing I want to do tomorrow is to get the souschefs.org website to have big giant buttons where it says, I have X problem, and you click on it and it takes you to what you need to do. Mm-hmm. So that's a thing I'd like to solve this week. That's something I'm sure you can help with because it's purely text. There's no code involved. We just need to communicate with people who may not have as much experience as even you. And that's what progress is going to look like. So meantime, hang out afterwards. We will get you connected.
I've used Git within different companies. I just I've never gone on a public GitHub or GitLab.
And that's fine.
That's the part I don't understand. Like in that world, it's a different process, it seems like. Right.
And it's like going and dancing in public.
Yes.
It's rather terrifying. It can be great fun, but it's absolutely terrifying.
I'm also a dancer, so I can get over this. Okay. And then you mentioned, thank you. You mentioned when cookbooks aren't maintained and you take it over. So I'm not exactly sure what that means. So like, does that mean that now Sous Chef is the one responsible? Like, let's say XYZ person owned it and now they've disappeared, right? Like, what exactly does that mean? Like,
so one of the things I didn't explain is what the heck the board does. Why do we have a board? Who are they? It's me, him, and a guy giving a talk over there. We can get into details about the board later, but what the board's responsibility is to make sure that the few rules that Sous Chefs has are enforced. So we keep the passwords for the few resources that we have. We enforce the code of conduct, and we enforce the licenses. We don't actually own any of the code, and that's complicated. I cannot explain to you why we don't own the code without yammering for a long time about the legal interpretations of software and copyright. But suffice to say, we make sure that someone is able to keep working on it.
Are there particular license that you do not work with? Like, is there like, or is it like more the licenses that your jobs will agree to, you know, like?
We default to Apache 2.
Yep.
Because it's the easiest one.
Good, then I
Yeah.
can participate. Cool.
There's a variety of available options, and things can be in Sous Chefs with different licenses.
Okay.
But the code of conduct is non-negotiable. You don't get to choose a different code of conduct based on your repo. That is uniform and is in. Fortunately, we've never had to enforce it, but we're not going to have any variation because we don't want any confusion. Being a decent human being is not optional, and so that's really core.
Thank you. I'm glad you have a code of conduct. That's awesome. Okay, I think my second question was kind of about the same thing that you just answered about kind of like when you say you take it over, what does that mean? What you answered. I also appreciate your analogy about the taking out the trash and plumbing. That's often an analogy I use about our everyday work as ops people. And I sadly want to say that I actually do feel excited about taking the trash out and doing the plumbing.
It's nice to have a clean house, isn't it? It's nice to come home and know that nothing needs to be done. It's nice to know that somebody else came in and cleaned up after themselves and a little bit after you. That's one of the great things about this community is people come in and have been cleaning up some of my messes, and I'm helping them clean up some of their messes. And we work together and we make a slightly better world. 1 or 2 lines of code, 1 or 2 text messages at a time. That's what we really want to do. I'm really glad that you asked those questions, and if there's anything we can do to help you contribute, doesn't have to be code. Like, the most important thing is communication. If all you want to do is hang out in our chat room and help support people, that is extremely valuable. There's something for everyone to do, and there's probably some way that we can help you. If you don't want to help, but you want our help, that's fine too. We're a community. It's filled with people, and people are complicated. But we want it all to get along, and we want to keep making it better. Does anyone else have any questions?
You're the guy who's writing the Terraform provider for Oracle Bare Metal Cloud.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I am.
For his sins.
And we are about to go on Oracle Bare Metal Cloud. I've been wanting to talk to you.
What?
I just realized that.
Can you see the look of fear on my face? I've been wanting to talk to you about this code on the internet.
Oh, no, not that. I just want to know about it.
Yeah. Well, no, the Sous Chefs is really all about, it's another way that I look at it is it's a group of people who work together to go be angry at things that are broken on the internet. That's what we do. It just happens to be a lot of chef stuff.
Not even going there. I'm just excited that you're writing a thing because my team doesn't want to use Terraform and I want to use Terraform.
Well, I would love to help with that as well. Jamie.
So I don't necessarily have a question per se, but as a fairly recent member to the Sous Chefs, I've only been doing chef for about 6 months. And after a couple of months, I thought I knew something about chef, and I was learning about cookbooks, and then I wound up needing the Samba cookbook, and Dan was just in the middle of rewriting it, and I got involved a little bit with the testing process, and from there, getting more involved with the Sous Chefs. And for someone who didn't know much about chef and who thought he knew a little bit about chef, working with the great guys in the Sous, I learned that I didn't know anything about chef, and that I ended up learning more about chef than I even knew existed about it. So for somebody who had nothing and just started with chef, wasn't sure how to contribute to the community, how to help people, how to go on and do things, the guys in the Sous really took me under their wing and said, look, here, let's help you. Let's go and show you how to do this so you can help contribute to the community. And that experience of starting from thinking you know chef, realizing you didn't know chef and now actually knowing chef and being part of a community that's helping you grow and learn a lot more was something that I found very rewarding. And I wanted to share my experience with everybody here in the room because sometimes some people are scared. Like Fatima, she's not really sure about, I don't know much. I want to get involved, but I'm not sure. Well, I wasn't sure and I didn't know, and they really helped me learn and grow and be a part of it. And now I'm actively contributing, reviewing pull requests, checking code changes, helping people out in the channels. Even in general, somebody had a question yesterday and I was like helping them out and I'm like, wow, I didn't think I could do this, a few months ago. And now they've empowered me to be a better community member and give back a lot more. So I just wanted to share that experience with people who may be having some doubts about, are my skills up to snuff? These are great guys, they're experts, but I'm like down here where I don't know
When did you
very
become an
much.
expert? I'm still not one of those.
But yeah, so don't get intimidated by some of the more experienced members. It's a great opportunity to surround yourself with people who know what they're doing to help grow your own skill sets. And it's really helped me a lot, both in the community and in my day job with Chef.
Awesome.
Thank you.
So Jamie is sort of a pilot member of our unofficial mentoring program. Dan also went to the talk on diversity yesterday, and we're wanting to work with Rhea about building a mentorship program that can help build this community so they don't all look like me. I mean, I have a luscious beard, but that's not a requirement. It's actually we'd like to have a
board member.
We'd like to have a few different kinds of people in the group because we're not all from the same place. We don't all have the same problems, but we can work together to have common solutions. And I'm really happy that Jamie is feeling like he's gotten a lot out of it. He hasn't yet realized that I'm now going to make him mentor other folks, and the guilt is going to be very extreme. But if you're lucky, I won't have to do that with you when you join. But I look forward to everyone joining and helping contribute and helping us solve your problems. And if you want to, you can help solve ours. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.